China Nanase, a 28-year-old exhausted corporate slave, barely catches the last train after another grueling day of overtime. Spotting a nostalgic game advertisement, she laments having absolutely no time to immerse herself in her favorite fantasy worlds. Completely drained by her endless work life, she is suddenly struck by a truck and wishes for just one more adventure. As consciousness fades into the void, a mysterious voice declares she has been chosen as the spirit princess. She drifts through an ethereal emptiness as her old reality completely slips away. Panicking about missing her train, her disjointed mind violently struggles to comprehend the sudden shift in reality. Waking up in an unfamiliar forest, she stares in absolute shock at her own tiny, unfamiliar hands. Horrified by the sudden realization, she wonders if she has inexplicably transformed into a little girl. Trying to stave off a full-blown panic attack, she frantically forces herself to take deep breaths. Glancing down at her diminutive new body, she reluctantly accepts the terrifying truth of her childish form. She quickly pieces together that the truck accident has somehow dumped her into an unknown world with a completely new body. A sudden rustling sound shatters the silence, instantly putting her on high alert. Sensing something rapidly approaching through the brush, pure fear grips her tiny frame. Unsure if the unseen threat is an animal or a human, she frantically decides her only option is to run for her life. She trips and crashes to the ground with a yelp, but a stranger suddenly appears to ask if she is okay. Looking up, she is completely stunned by the sight of a beautiful man offering his hand to help her stand. Still terrified of the unknown, she recoils slightly as he gently reassures her that there is nothing to fear. Disarmed by his warm smile, her overwhelming tension finally shatters and she bursts into loud, infantile tears. The man introduces himself as Alt, patiently comforting her until she calms down enough to speak clearly. After introducing herself as China, she cleverly hides the truth about the truck and vaguely explains she is lost. Realizing she is entirely alone, Alt kindly invites her to safely accompany his group down to the nearby town. Suddenly, a boisterous, wild-looking boy bounds over and cheerfully introduces himself as Kyle. Alt calms her surprise by explaining that this chaotic newcomer is simply one of his traveling companions. Startled by his sheer energy, China timidly stammers out a polite greeting to the energetic boy. A third man violently smacks Kyle on the head, fiercely scolding him for startling a young girl without a proper introduction. The stern newcomer apologizes for his friend's reckless behavior and formally introduces himself as Rai. Silently wondering if they are some kind of traveling comedy troupe, she politely returns Rai's formal greeting. Kyle excitedly begs to pat her head, and she nervously grants him permission to do so. While Kyle happily dotes on her, Rai and Alt exchange a highly serious, knowing glance behind her back. They quietly suspect she is no normal child, theorizing that slave traders might have kidnapped her to sell. Noting her strikingly beautiful eyes and rare hair color, they wonder if the wild local legends are actually true. They silently suspect this tiny, stranded girl might actually be the legendary spirit princess, the beloved child of the spirits. Overhearing their muttered whispers about her strange features, China urgently asks to borrow a mirror. Alt immediately hands her a small mirror, watching closely as she prepares to examine her new reflection. Staring into the glass, she lets out a breathless gasp, completely failing to recognize the ethereal face staring back. She marvels at her dramatically altered appearance, knowing she has never dyed her hair or worn colored contacts in her life. Her frantic thoughts are interrupted when Alt points out that she is bleeding from a fresh physical injury. She realizes the painful scrape must have happened when she blindly tumbled to the ground earlier. Raising a glowing hand, Alt smoothly casts a healing spell over her damaged skin. Utterly mesmerized by the genuine magic, she confirms to an amused Alt that it is her very first time witnessing such a miracle. Connecting the truck collision to the classic otherworld tropes she loved reading about, China realizes her situation mirrors those exact stories. Overwhelmed by the sudden revelation, she stammers in disbelief at actually being reincarnated into a world of swords and magic. Alt gently checks on her well-being, snapping her back to reality as she quickly assures him she is perfectly fine. Despite enjoying countless stories about this very scenario, she marvels that such a fantastical fate actually befell her. Noting the setting sun, Alt suggests they stop traveling and set up camp for the night. Suddenly, her deeply ingrained corporate slave instincts flare up, driving an irrational urge to find work to do. Startled by her abrupt movement, Alt calls out in concern as she bolts away. She trips and scrapes herself, prompting Alt to gently point out her bleeding wound. Feeling deeply embarrassed about falling twice in one day, she watches as Alt casts a healing spell to mend her injury. Eager to prove her worth, she urgently asks Alt if there is any task she can help with. Alt kindly suggests she rest her tired body, but she stubbornly insists on assisting him. Channeling her relentless work ethic, she passionately declares that labor is a virtue, and those who do not work should not eat. Amused by her determination, Alt tasks her with separating mushrooms into a cooking pot, which she accepts with military enthusiasm. Inspecting the ingredients, she notes they look remarkably similar to earthly shimeji mushrooms. She silently wonders if standard unappetizing mushrooms even exist in this magical realm. Finishing her assigned task, she happily hands over the prepared ingredients to a grateful Alt. With a cheerful exclamation, Alt finishes preparing the steaming campfire meal. They finally settle down together to enjoy their freshly cooked dinner. Taking her first bite, her eyes widen in pure delight at the incredibly delicious flavor. Chuckling softly, Alt graciously accepts her enthusiastic praise for his impressive culinary skills. Her corporate mind immediately begins daydreaming about recruiting Alt to cook for her company's cafeteria back on Earth. Lost in her fantasy, she imagines herself eagerly visiting his cafeteria counter every single day. Snapping back to reality, she stares down at her plate and realizes the portion size is absolutely massive for her tiny body. Alt warmly offers to finish whatever she cannot eat, prompting a quiet, exhausted thank you from the little girl. Extreme fatigue washes over her as she reflects on the sheer chaos of getting hit by a truck and waking up in another world. Feeling entirely out of sorts, she struggles to reconcile her adult mind with her strange new childish condition. She recalls her earlier bout of heavy crying, feeling a twinge of adult embarrassment. Despite the overwhelming situation, a genuine sense of gratitude fills her heart for meeting such kind people. A bright new morning dawns, marking the official start of her second day living in another world. Jolting awake in a panic, her leftover corporate instincts trick her into thinking she is late for work. Alt greets her with a warm good morning, grounding her back in the reality of her reincarnated existence. She apologizes for passing out right after dinner, and Alt reassuringly attributes her fatigue to her earlier crying fit. Cringing internally at the reminder of her tears, she desperately begs him to forget her uncharacteristic breakdown. Brushing past the embarrassment, they settle down to begin eating their morning meal. Staring at the unfamiliar food, she quietly wonders what kind of exotic fruit sits before her. Suddenly, detailed information about the Pimo fruit floods her mind, explaining its sweet taste and dark pink ripeness indicator. Shocked by the sudden influx of magical knowledge, she realizes she just successfully performed an appraisal skill. She frantically wonders if she possesses an overpowered cheat skill, typically reserved only for high-level adventurers. Catching her spacing out, Alt asks what is wrong, but she quickly dismisses his concern with a forced smile. Relying on her corporate survival tactics, she decides to hide her potentially troublesome unique ability until she better understands this world's common sense. Biting into the sweet fruit, China discovers it is incredibly delicious and tastes exactly like a peach. Kyle enthusiastically encourages her to eat a lot so she can grow big, completely oblivious to her secret worries about gaining weight. Alt outlines their schedule, explaining they will take a leisurely 2-day pace to reach the town so they do not push China too hard. Hesitant, she asks what the men were originally doing in the forest and if it is truly okay to just head to town. Alt assures her they had already finished their work early and were merely doing some light exploration before heading home anyway. Flashing a gentle smile, he insists that there is absolutely nothing for her to worry about. Realizing they are being incredibly considerate to ease her anxiety, she offers them a heartfelt thank you. Still feeling slightly apologetic for delaying their journey, she politely states that she looks forward to traveling together. Alt suddenly calls her name, breaking her train of thought. He kindly requests that she drop her stiff formalities, explaining they would all be much happier if she spoke comfortably with them. Reminding herself that she is currently a child and should not act like an overly considerate adult, she realizes he is completely right. Deciding to drop her rigid corporate persona, she resolves to be much more honest with her feelings. Flashing a bright and genuine smile, she casually thanks them and confirms she understands. The group finishes their morning preparations and quickly readies themselves to begin the long journey ahead. Kyle excitedly pumps his fists, loudly declaring that it is finally time to head out. Knowing her tiny body cannot walk all day without falling again, Alt firmly suggests she let Rai carry her. Blushing heavily at the embarrassing prospect, she timidly begs Lord Rai for his assistance. Misinterpreting Rai's intense silence as an outright rejection, she quickly drops her head and apologizes for imposing. As she nervously promises to practice walking properly, Rai immediately interrupts to correct her tragic misunderstanding. To her absolute surprise, Rai firmly declares that he actually wants to carry her anytime she needs it. He awkwardly admits that he simply dislikes hearing her call him Lord Rai with such intense formality. Tilting her head, she softly asks if calling him just Rai would be better. Satisfied with the casual change, Rai swiftly lifts her onto his strong shoulders as Kyle leads the way. The party sets off through the vast wilderness, making steady progress toward the distant town. Gazing out at the endless grassy plains, she marvels at how Kyle manages to navigate the path without any visible landmarks. Her thoughts drift back to her old adventure novels, reminding her of a convenient spell known as exploration magic. Endlessly curious about her newfound abilities, she wonders if she might actually be able to cast exploration magic herself. Closing her eyes, she visualizes a bat emitting ultrasonic waves to perfectly map out its surroundings. Her eyes snap open in shock as she successfully pings the environment, instantly mapping everything within a 1-kilometer radius. Completely stunned by her own overpowered success, she begins to seriously suspect she has been given cheat abilities. Eager to test her boundaries, she excitedly wonders what other magical feats she might be capable of performing. She ponders using enemy detection magic next, knowing it is a standard cheat skill that reveals the number, position, and strength of foes. Frustration quickly sets in as she realizes she cannot properly detect monsters without knowing what they look like in this unknown world. Scowling in heavy concentration, she groans over the sheer difficulty of imagining unknown creatures. Rai suddenly remarks that she is making interesting funny faces, causing her to panic upon realizing he was watching her the entire time. Her face flushes bright red from utter embarrassment as Rai dryly points out her highly visible fluster. The lighthearted moment shatters as the group abruptly halts, prompting Alt to ask Kyle what is wrong up ahead. Kyle grimly reports that he has been avoiding encounters as much as possible, but the threats directly ahead are entirely unavoidable. Tension spikes instantly as Kyle reveals that dangerous monsters are blocking their path. Pointing ahead, Kyle grimly confirms the presence of monsters blocking their forward path. Squinting at a distant, indiscernible figure, China listens as Alt casually offers to go ahead alone. Panicking at the thought of a real monster, she urgently asks if he will truly be safe. Flashing a gentle smile, Alt reassures her that he is actually quite strong despite his unassuming appearance. Observing her worried expression, Rai notes that letting Alt go alone is clearly bad for her heart. Stepping in, Kyle kindly suggests she close her eyes if she feels scared, before cheerfully signaling the advance. Drawing his blade, Alt confidently strides toward the awaiting creature. Instructing her not to wander, Alt asks China to wait safely behind Rai. Peeking nervously from behind her protector, she watches Alt prepare his strike. In a single, fluid motion, Alt decisively slashes through the beast to defeat it. Concluding the battle instantly, Alt triumphantly announces that the threat is neutralized. Staring intently at the defeated creature, China realizes this is her very first time seeing a real monster. Analyzing the corpse, she observes a faint, chilly black mist and identifies it as the monster's magical power. Suddenly, an epiphany strikes as she realizes she can use this specific magical signature to fuel her enemy detection magic. Eager to test her new theory, she immediately resolves to try casting the spell. Returning victorious, Alt gently checks on her well-being while she silently marvels at his amazing combat skills. Examining her expression closely, Rai confirms to the others that she appears completely unharmed. Feeling slightly competitive, Kyle stubbornly mutters that he could have handled the monster just as easily. Amused by the boy's clear jealousy, Alt teases Kyle about his adorable, pouting reaction. Smiling at the endearing dynamic, China silently compares Kyle to a rebellious younger brother before praising Rai's strength as well. Moving on, Alt casually tosses the monster's remains into a magical bag and suggests they resume their journey. Recognizing it as a storage magic bag, China stares enviously at the incredibly convenient item. Immediately, her corporate mind calculates how easily her laptop, meeting materials, and cosmetic pouch would fit inside it. Snapping back to reality, she catches herself and realizes those are all earthly office items she no longer uses in this fantasy world. Soon after, a bright new sky signals the dawn of her third day living in this alternate reality. Trudging through the endless grassy plains, she lets out an exhausted sigh over the boring, unchanging scenery. Searching for a distraction, she decides it is the perfect time to finally practice her enemy detection magic. Closing her eyes, she stretches her senses outward and focuses intensely on remembering the cold black mist from the monster. Instantly, her magical radar pings, detecting an unknown presence lurking directly ahead of them. Pointing forward abruptly, Kyle urges China to look closely at the path ahead. Spotting a pair of tiny, adorable creatures, she gasps in pure delight at their cute appearance. Quickly, Alt warns her that despite their innocent looks, those creatures are ferocious monsters that often attack unsuspecting children. As Kyle suggests taking a detour to avoid unnecessary killing, China darkly muses that having such magical power in her past life would have let her fight back against her nasty boss. Cresting a small hill, Kyle announces that the grand entrance to Looter Town is finally coming into view. Gazing in awe at the massive stone walls, China notes the bustling crowds gathered outside the relatively large settlement. At the gates, heavily armed soldiers stand guard, strictly checking the steady stream of people trying to enter. Explaining the rules, Alt notes that entry is strictly forbidden unless travelers present proper identification papers to the guards. Panic immediately sets in as she realizes she lacks any form of fantasy ID, leaving her terrified that the soldiers might arrest her. Sensing her rising anxiety, Alt quickly assures her she can enter without papers, prompting China to grimly recall a time her old boss raged at her for losing her employee ID. Clarifying the process, he explains that she simply needs to pay a fee and hold her hand over a crystal ball that checks for criminal history. Panicking about her lack of money, China is quickly reassured by Alt's calming presence. Turning to his companion, Alt quietly requests that Rai place a cloak over the young girl to conceal her. Alt explains that her striking appearance stands out too much, making the disguise absolutely necessary to protect her from danger. With her small frame safely hidden beneath the heavy cloak, Alt confidently signals for the group to finally move out. Confused by their sudden detour, China lets out a noise of surprise as they bypass the main lines. Alt patiently explains that adventurers have an exclusive gate to ensure their vital work is never hindered by long queues. Hearing the familiar business term, her corporate mind lights up as she realizes adventurers receive VIP treatment. She furiously blushes over her own workplace instincts, while the men silently observe her making funny faces. Approaching the dedicated entrance, an eager guard spots them and warmly welcomes Lord Kyle and his company back. Maintaining protocol, the guard politely requests their identification papers and brings out a crystal ball for inspection. Kyle cheerfully hands over his documents and casually instructs the guard to proceed with the mandatory check. Placing a hand over the glowing crystal ball, the required magical inspection is swiftly carried out without issue. Confirming a clean record, the satisfied guard declares the toll acceptable and invites the group to pass through the gates. Kyle effortlessly breezes past the checkpoint, casually thanking the guard for his hard work. When China asks if he personally knows the soldier, Kyle smugly reveals that their group is actually quite famous. Her imagination runs wild, envisioning her new companions as idle adventurers swarmed by screaming fans and celebratory dances. Pushing the wild story aside for later, Alt announces their immediate plan to visit the local guild. Stepping into the vibrant town, China stares in pure awe at the bustling, incredible fantasy world surrounding her. Noticing her dangerous distraction, Alt gently guides the awestruck girl through the busy streets to keep her safe. Kyle hoists her onto his shoulders with a joyful shout, promising to take her sightseeing once they finish their guild business. She internally questions her own simple-mindedness, realizing she just reacted with the genuine, unbridled excitement of a normal child. Entering the bustling guild hall, a cheerful receptionist immediately welcomes the three famous adventurers home. Kyle casually announces their return and demands to know if the guildmaster is currently available. The receptionist nods respectfully, asking the imposing trio to wait just a brief moment for confirmation. A massively muscular old man quickly appears, noting the rarity of their visit while asking if they have time to talk. The guildmaster leads them upstairs for a private discussion, leaving China deeply intimidated by his clear authority. Falling back on her corporate survival wisdom, she firmly resolves to use absolute politeness as her personal armor. The group silently files into the guildmaster's private upstairs office, shutting the heavy wooden door behind them. Taking his seat, the old man presses a hand against a small box, instantly triggering a sudden pulse of magic. Startled by the abrupt magical surge, China jumps until Alt gently reassures her that it is merely a soundproofing barrier. She stares in total disbelief, completely amazed that such complex magic activated with a simple physical touch. Her childish excitement completely overrides her fear as she eagerly realizes the box is a genuine magic tool. Wasting no time, the stern guildmaster crosses his arms and directly asks what they need to discuss. Alt formally introduces China, explaining they discovered the lost child wandering near the river, traversing Looter Forest. Leaning in, Alt gently warns China that the man before her is the highest authority figure in the entire guild. Feeling exactly like she is meeting a terrifying company president, she nervously bows and forces out a polite greeting. The imposing old man stares down at her tiny form, letting out a deep, calculating hum. Suddenly, his fierce expression melts into a warm smile as he heartily praises her for greeting him so admirably. Introducing himself formally as Danglef, he completely shatters his tough exterior by cheerfully demanding she call him Grandpa Dan. Utterly dumbfounded by the drastic shift in tone, she realizes this terrifying executive is looking at her exactly like a doting grandfather. Grandpa Dan loudly demands a grandchild, prompting the others to fiercely remind him he needs a bride before starting a family. Dan jokingly suggests adopting China as his own grandchild, sparking immediate outrage from the group about his unbearable parenting. Alt notices China staring at the chaotic group in complete, stunned silence. He gently reassures her not to worry, explaining that they constantly bicker like a real parent and child. Dropping his playful demeanor instantly, Dan announces it is time to stop joking around. He politely asks China if she would mind answering a few questions, to which she nervously agrees. When interrogated about her birthplace and age, she lies about her home and estimates her age to be around 5. Dan presses her for her parents' names and her entry into the forest, but she claims absolute ignorance. She explains that she simply woke up lost in the woods with zero memories before Alt's group found her. Internally sweating, China realizes she can never confess she is actually a 30-year-old corporate slave reincarnated from modern Japan. Dan thanks her for her cooperation and asks permission for future questions, leaving her feeling deeply guilty for causing them worry. Resolving to at least act like a cheerful child, she enthusiastically agrees to help. Dan orders Rai to take China downstairs for some tasty guild food, while the adults stay behind to discuss serious matters. Ray obediently leads the tiny girl down the wooden stairs toward the bustling dining hall. Taking a seat, China curiously examines the strange parchment handed to her and realizes it is a menu. She marvels at her magical ability to read the unknown text, even though the exotic dish names make absolutely no sense. Giving up on the confusing options, she happily asks to eat whatever Rai recommends. Rai flags down a waiter to place the order, resulting in a steaming bowl of food quickly arriving at their table. Staring at the colossal mound of meat and rice, China realizes it is an impossibly massive beef bowl. Ray promises to eat her leftovers while casually noting that today's serving is actually just a normal portion. Her sharp corporate instincts realize he deliberately ordered a huge meal, fully expecting to finish her scraps. Deeply impressed by his capable foresight, she warmly thanks him before eagerly digging into the delicious food. Meanwhile upstairs, the rugged men completely lose their composure over how unbelievably cute China is. Kyle violently shakes Alt in sheer panic, obsessing over the adorable way she waved her tiny hand at him. Dan casually adds fuel to the fire by admitting she was incredibly precious even when she was crying. Enraged by the revelation, Kyle threatens to brutally erase Alt for making her cry, while Alt frantically pleads his innocence. Slamming his fist down, Dan orders both of them to shut up so they can finally discuss their critical agenda. Alt cuts straight to the chase, asking the guildmaster to confirm if the girl is truly a spirit's beloved child. Dan confirms her eyes hold the colors of wind, water, darkness, and 2 others, making her a miraculous existence loved by 5 spirit lords. Alt swiftly corrects the old man, urging him to look closer at the gold of light also shining within her eyes. He reveals she possesses both darkness and light, proving she is actually loved by 6 spirit lords. Usually, a beloved child is born blessed by only one of the 6 elemental spirit lords. Kyle realizes this explains her survival in the dangerous forest, noting that spirits supposedly protect a beloved child from harm. Alt asks if history records any child loved by multiple spirit lords other than the legendary spirit princess, which Dan strictly denies. The terrifying reality sets in as Dan theorizes China might be the first spirit princess to manifest in over 3,000 years. Legends describe the spirit princess as a mythical figure loved by all spirit lords who actively organizes the entire world. Regardless of the world-shaking secret she carries, Dan firmly declares their absolute mission to protect her remains unchanged. The men fiercely swear to defend the tiny girl with their own hands so she can live a long and happy life. Hating that she must hide her striking face, Kyle asks if they can somehow petition a spirit lord to alter her appearance. Alt immediately shoots down the impossible idea, citing zero historical precedents for actually meeting a spirit lord. Dan suddenly interrupts the argument, mysteriously claiming that the possibility of meeting a spirit is not entirely zero. He slides a dusty book across the table, explaining he discovered it while organizing the warehouse yesterday. The hardened adventurers stare in utter bewilderment as Dan proudly presents a simple children's picture book. Dan proudly presents a simple picture book to the confused adventurers. The ancient pages tell of God creating the world and giving grand orders to the 6 spirit lords. Instructed to organize the newborn world, the spirit lords created a single life that would become the spirit princess. Descending upon the pristine land, the lonely spirit princess softly asked for friends to keep her company. Eager to please her, the spirit lords decided to create loyal companions for each of them. These newly forged magical companions later became known throughout history as the divine beasts. Working in perfect harmony, the spirit lords shaped a lush, hospitable world for all living creatures to thrive in. The spirit princess watched over the prosperous, thriving world with a gentle and loving gaze. Surrounded by her loyal divine beasts, she eventually ended her peaceful life in quiet tranquility. Following her tragic passing, the remaining divine beasts fiercely swore to protect the land holding her precious memories. Kyle casually dismisses the story as a mere fairy tale, but Dan quickly interjects to correct his foolish assumption. Revealing an ornate box, Dan explains it was a royal gift given to the very first guildmaster of their town. Though famously sealed shut for generations, Dan reveals the heavy lid mysteriously popped open just yesterday. Alt instantly connects the box's sudden unlocking to China's miraculous appearance in the forest. Putting the ancient clues together, Rai realizes the protected land of memories from the legend must be entirely real. Dan notes that ancient rumors have long claimed the perilous Sea of Trees beyond Luder Forest is actively guarded by divine beasts. Alt adds that stories of lost travelers mysteriously teleporting back to the forest entrance further prove the beast's unseen presence. Dan astutely deduces that successfully contacting these divine beasts would be the absolute fastest shortcut to reaching the spirit lords. Trusting their incredible strength, Dan encourages the elite adventurers to brave the deep forest to secure China's safety. The hardened warriors stare grimly as they contemplate the sheer danger of venturing deep into the mythical Sea of Trees. Alt firmly insists they must properly explain the terrifying situation to China before recklessly dragging her into such extreme danger. Fearing she might be crying herself to sleep after a traumatic day, Alt expresses deep, heartfelt concern for the little girl. Meanwhile, the completely exhausted China is shown passed out and sleeping soundly in her warm bed. A bright, peaceful new morning eventually dawns over the bustling fantasy town. Stirring awake with a soft groan, China groggily remembers passing out immediately after stuffing her face at dinner. Stretching her tiny arms, she cheerfully bids good morning to a slumbering Rai, who groggily mutters about the cold. Suddenly realizing she is sharing a bed with a grown man, she jumps up in sheer, absolute panic. Flailing wildly, she internally screams that her mind belongs to a mature adult, and this situation is completely unacceptable. Sweating profusely, her corporate instincts flare up as she desperately worries she might somehow get arrested for this terrifying scenario. Kyle abruptly enters the room to wake them up, finding China desperately begging for his immediate rescue. Sighing at Rai's notoriously grumpy morning mood, Kyle firmly promises to book them separate rooms starting tomorrow. Moving to the dining area, Alt presents fresh bakery sandwiches, leaving China shocked to find familiar teriyaki chicken and egg options. Biting into the fluffy bread, she delights in the incredible meal while Alt gently reminds her to chew her food slowly. With breakfast finished, Alt softly asks if he can explain the serious, heavy discussion he had with Dan the previous day. Sensing the drastic shift in tone, China gives the serious adventurer her full, undivided attention. Alt carefully reveals that her strikingly unique hair and eye colors hold a very special, profound meaning in this world. Her overactive imagination instantly wonders if her vibrant colors serve as a dangerous animal's natural warning pattern. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Alt prepares to drop a massive, life-altering revelation on the tiny girl. He firmly declares that her physical appearance is absolute proof she is a legendary beloved child of the Spirit Lords. Staring blankly as the men nod in utter seriousness, she casually recognizes the classic otherworld reincarnation trope unfolding perfectly before her. China reels in shock, struggling to comprehend how a corporate slave became a beloved child. She instantly fears her conspicuous appearance will get her kidnapped by villains. Alt grimly admits that humans are completely powerless to alter her striking looks. Panic sets in as she imagines being enslaved or used as political leverage. Alt confidently interrupts her spiraling fears to offer a bold solution. He boldly declares they will journey to meet the Spirit Lord personally. Astonished, China asks if meeting such a divine being is actually possible. Alt cautions that finding the entity or getting her wish granted isn't guaranteed. He reveals the legendary being hides deep within the dangerous Looter Forest. Furthermore, ancient myths claim divine beasts strictly protect this sacred territory. Alt warns the terrifying journey involves facing massive, ferocious monsters. Leaving the final choice in her hands, he solemnly asks China to decide. Hearing about divine beasts instantly triggers a bizarre, overwhelming trance. Her mind fixates completely on imagining impossibly fluffy, adorable creatures. While the men panic, she enthusiastically screams her agreement to go. Throwing her arms up, she excitedly declares she is completely unafraid. She happily admits that imagining fluffy animals temporarily paralyzed her with joy. When asked if she's met one, she confesses acting solely on a gut feeling. She dramatically claims her very soul screams for these fluffy beasts. Baffled by her sheer intensity, the bewildered men hesitantly agree to the plan. Alt states they must first officially register China as a guild adventurer. He explains the resulting guild card will neatly solve her lack of identification. Noting Grandpa Dan handles paperwork, Alt introduces the adventurer ranking system. He maps the strict hierarchy, noting everyone starts at the bottom G rank. After detailing strict guild regulations, he asks if she has further questions. Seizing the moment, China interrogates Kyle about his earlier fame claims. Alt recalls they briefly discussed this boasting at the town gate. She excitedly asks if the handsome trio is actually a secret idol group. Laughing, Kyle clarifies, their fame comes purely from immense combat strength. Kyle proudly boasts he sits at the absolute pinnacle of the adventurer ranks. Alt explains that top rankers rarely form a permanent three-man party. China realizes exactly why the strongest ranker party commands such immense respect. Curious, she asks why three lone wolves suddenly decided to team up. Alt says Grandpa Dan initially forced them together for a special request. Discovering incredible combat synergy, they decided to stay teamed up permanently. They streamlined operations by exclusively taking direct requests from Grandpa Dan. China hollowly asks if protecting her is just another cold, calculated order. Dark memories of transactional corporate relationships flood her anxious mind. She grimly accepts that temporary associations are unavoidable in the working world. Despite understanding the logic, she silently admits the truth is deeply lonely. Kyle and Rai look concerned, assuring China they aren't traveling with her simply because of an order. Rai warmly explains they genuinely want to stay with her forever if she allows it. Startled, China asks if they will still want to be with her, even when she eventually becomes an adult. Rai frantically denies she is a nuisance, assuring her it is perfectly okay to stay together. Alt chimes in with a gentle smile, asking if she is truly okay with accompanying them. Tears well up in China's eyes as she excitedly declares she wants to stay with everyone too. Kyle pumps his fists into the air, officially declaring China a permanent member of their party. Clenching her tiny fists, China vows to become strong enough to take on requests alongside them. Kyle enthusiastically agrees, ready to move forward with their brand new companion. China looks around confusedly to find Alt missing, while Kyle suggests they head to the guild to register her as an adventurer. Alt waves goodbye in a flashback, explaining he has to go shopping to prepare various supplies. Bursting through the doors, Grandpa Dan dramatically crushes China in a massive, affectionate hug. China gasps for air as the burly guild master cheerfully welcomes them back to the hall. Releasing the tiny girl, Dan adopts a serious expression and notes her decision to enter the forest. Leaning in closely, Dan gravely warns her that the deep forest is incredibly dangerous. He strictly orders her to never leave her companion's side, a condition she enthusiastically accepts. Shifting the heavy mood, Dan cheerfully suggests officially registering China as a proper adventurer. He slides a blank, magical guild card across the wooden desk toward the little girl. Handing her a large quill, he instructs her to carefully write her name on the parchment. Gripping the massive pen nervously, China awkwardly scribbles her name onto the document. Dan gently explains she just needs to drop a single drop of blood onto the card to finalize it. He carefully pricks her finger, offering a sweet reward cookie to soothe the slight sting. China stares in awe as the magical guild card glows and absorbs her tiny drop of blood. Dan explains her status words will soon float up, assuring her that only she can see the text. Staring at the card, she is horrified to see God Race, Creation Magic, and titles like Spirit Princess staring back at her. Sweating profusely from the overpowered stats, she frantically stammers and hides the card when Kyle asks what is wrong. Rai narrows his eyes suspiciously, directly asking if she is hiding something important from them. Unable to keep such a massive secret, she awkwardly confesses that her race isn't actually human. She nervously reveals that the magical card specifically lists her as the mythical god race. Holding her head in pure despair, she realizes she is completely abnormal and not a standard companion. Kyle fiercely grabs her tiny shoulders, staring intently into her panicked, swirling eyes. Rai gently reassures her that being a different race changes absolutely nothing about who she is. Kyle excitedly agrees, insisting her immense cuteness makes the god race perfectly logical, while affirming she remains their precious friend. Dan interrupts the touching moment, demanding she reveal the rest of her unbelievable status to the group. Defeated by their curiosity, she reluctantly agrees to read out the rest of her god tier stats. Clearing his throat, Dan decides to use this shocking opportunity to formally teach her about statuses. Snapping his fingers sharply, he commands the group's full attention for the upcoming lecture. Pointing to a chalkboard, Dan explains the 7 magic attributes while noting her null attribute is a total mystery she must master herself. China internally groans at her cheat-like abilities, secretly comparing the intense Dan to a strict cram school teacher. Dan solemnly explains that her impossible status practically confirms she is the legendary second spirit princess. He warns her that the physical proofs of fire and earth must still be hidden somewhere on her body. China sighs deeply, dreading that her appearance will become even more flashy, as she agrees to look for the marks later. Leaning in with an intimidating glare, Dan strictly forbids her from telling anyone else about her overpowered status. Kyle and Rai eagerly agree, promising to only inform Alt while keeping it a strict secret from the rest of the world. Sweating heavily under their intense gaze, China quickly nods in absolute, terrified understanding. Dan praises her as a good girl, leaving China deeply sympathetic to his overwhelming fatherly worry. She chillingly realizes that bad people would definitely appear to exploit her god-tier abilities if the truth leaked. Staring at her tiny hands, she grimly accepts that despite her past adult life, she is physically just a weak 5-year-old. Exhausted by the massive magical revelations, Rai sighs and suggests they finally return to the inn to rest. Kyle and Dan watch them leave, feeling slightly apologetic for overwhelming the little girl with such heavy information. Returning to the inn, they are absolutely shocked to find Alt enthusiastically greeting them alongside a massive pile of luggage. Rai stares at the ridiculous hoard of supplies, utterly bewildered by Alt's unnecessarily energetic shopping spree. Exhausted from the ordeal, the adventurer announced he needed to rest in the next room, while Alto curiously asked about China-chan's status. Startled by her sudden fatigue, he frantically apologized and asked if merely revealing her status had drained her that much. Curious about the massive bundle, China tugged at Alto's sleeve and asked what he had brought back. Flashing a smug, triumphant grin, Alto proudly declared that he was glad she asked. Revealing the contents, he enthusiastically explained he had purchased clothes, shoes, and essential adventuring gear specifically for her, leaving China utterly shocked. Overwhelmed by the generosity, she hesitantly asked if it was truly okay to accept, to which he warmly insisted it was a celebration of her officially joining their party. Beaming with pure joy, China happily thanked him and expressed her immense gratitude. Digging through the massive pile of garments, she marveled in awe at how absolutely adorable every single piece was. Holding up a stylish hooded jacket, she gasped at the sheer volume of outfits Alto had acquired. Alto explained that he specifically chose cute designs since she was required to wear a hood whenever she ventured outside. Scratching his head, he bashfully admitted that his inability to choose led him to buy out the entire store, completely shocking the local shop staff. Despite her genuine happiness, China stared at the mountain of fabric and nervously wondered if he had gone completely overboard. Rationalizing the excessive gift, she decided to wear them happily while noting they might become unnecessary if she actually met the Spirit King. Leaning in with an intense, unsettling stare, Alto fiercely declared his desperate desire to see her try them all on. Reflecting internally, China realized she secretly longed for such adorable outfits and didn't actually mind the overwhelming wardrobe. Dark memories surfaced of her past life, reminding her how she avoided cute fashion out of sheer fear of being judged as a 30-year-old. Suddenly struck by a joyful epiphany, she realized her new 5-year-old body gave her total freedom to embrace the cute aesthetic. Thrilled by the flawless logic, she celebrated the absolute victory of wearing adorable clothes naturally while anticipating endless praise. Feeding into the excitement, Alto and Kyle enthusiastically dug through the pile to select even more outfits for her to model. Watching the chaotic dress-up session from afar, Rai deadpanned and questioned why the grown men were getting so ridiculously excited. Stepping into the light, China modeled a stunning new ensemble, complete with a stylish capelet and sturdy boots. A faint blush dusted Rai's cheeks as he softly complimented her, admitting the new clothes suited her perfectly. Greeting the bright new morning, China cheerfully confirmed that a good night's sleep had completely refreshed her exhausted body. Sitting at the table, Kyle nervously scratched his cheek and admitted he still hadn't revealed China's overpowered status to Alto. Mustering his courage, Kyle hesitantly called out to Alto to finally deliver the heavy news. Slumped completely over the table, Alto weakly apologized, admitting the sheer shock of her godly stats had caused him to lose consciousness. Springing back to life, Alto fiercely ordered China to keep her status an absolute secret, prompting her frantic agreement. Sighing deeply, Alto reasoned that being reborn as a literal child of God was a world-shattering revelation that would naturally shock anyone. Hoping to lighten the heavy atmosphere, Alto warmly suggested taking a tour of the town tomorrow, instantly sparking China's excitement. Grounding the group back in reality, Kyle advised them to stop overthinking the future and simply focus on enjoying their current meal. Kyle proudly declared he would personally teach her the adventurer mindset before taking her to the forest edge to practice magic. Bursting into the bustling streets the next day, China's eyes sparkled in pure awe at the endless row of vibrant food stalls. Spotting the sizzling meat, she joyfully noted that grilled skewer stalls were an absolute staple of any proper otherworld adventure. Surrounded by incredible aromas, she clutched her head in delightful agony as she struggled to choose from the overwhelming menu. Her mouth watered as she mentally cataloged the exotic offerings, from juicy kebab sandwiches and mystery skewers to sweet fried churros. Noticing her intense indecision, Alto cheerfully offered to just buy absolutely everything, leaving China screaming in shock. Waving her tiny hands frantically, she panicked and insisted her small stomach couldn't possibly handle that much food. Smirking confidently, Kyle patted Rai's back and declared that their resident food fighter would easily handle all the leftovers. True to his new title, Rai casually presented a towering, impossibly large mountain of street food to the awestruck girl. Offering the feast to her, Alto gently asked what she wanted to try first, as she stared nervously at the massive spread. Making her ultimate decision, she eagerly opened her mouth wide and chomped down on a thick cut of roasted meat. Explosive flavor instantly flooded her senses, leading her to realize such richly marbled perfection simply didn't exist in her old reality. Accepting another bite directly from Alto, she happily chewed the savory wrap and likened its familiar taste to a delicious kebab. Her culinary mind raced as she praised the flawless combination of crisp, refreshing vegetables balancing out the intensely spicy meat. The fiery spice suddenly overwhelmed her childish palate, sending her into a violently coughing fit as tears pricked her eyes. As Alto frantically offered soothing fruit water, she internally cursed her 5-year-old body, knowing her 30-year-old tongue would have easily handled the heat. Chuckling at her rapid recovery, Alto warmly noted her newfound love for street food and playfully suggested moving on to dessert. Throwing caution to the wind, she happily stuffed her cheeks with an endless parade of unbelievably delicious sweets. Patting her comfortably full stomach, she listened as Alto eagerly asked what destination she wanted to explore next. Raising her tiny fist into the air, she enthusiastically declared that her very first stop had to be the local weapon shop. Acknowledging her reassuring motivation, Kyle warns China that she probably cannot handle weapons right away. Stopping outside the weapon shop, he strongly advises her to be careful around the dangerous merchandise. Peeking through the wooden doorway, China stares in absolute awe at the deadly arsenal. Scanning the massive blades, she realizes a simple dagger is the only weapon her tiny body could possibly wield. Turning back to her companions, she reluctantly admits it is still far too early for her to use such heavy gear. Shaking off the brief disappointment, she eagerly declares the magic tool shop as their next destination. The party arrives outside the charming, intricately decorated storefront of the magical goods vendor. Stepping inside, the trio is immediately greeted by the warm welcome of the mysterious shop owner. The woman smiles warmly, noting how incredibly rare it is for high-ranking adventurers to visit her modest store. Alt casually explains they only stopped by because China wanted to look around, prompting the owner to invite the girl to take her time. China wanders through the mystical shop, utterly mesmerized by the strange and glowing artifacts. Reaching for a strange device, she asks what it is, but the owner cryptically warns her against touching unknown magical items. Staring deeply into the child's eyes, the owner mysteriously promises that the things she truly needs will naturally reveal themselves in time. Confused by the heavy riddle, China silently wonders what the strange woman actually means. Admitting she cannot comprehend the complex inventory, she turns to Alt and signals that she is ready to leave. The owner clarifies that the shop simply lacks anything she requires today, inviting her to return after some time has passed. She kindly promises that China might finally understand the shop's true purpose upon her eventual return. Nodding enthusiastically, China eagerly agrees to wait for that fated time to arrive. Waving goodbye to the mysterious woman, the young girl silently promises to visit the store again someday. Noting the setting sun, Alt gently asks if there is anywhere else she wants to explore before they head back. Hoping to speak directly with the creator of this world, China eagerly requests a trip to the local church. Her eyes sparkle with sheer excitement as she realizes this is her chance to finally meet God. Stepping into the grand sanctuary, she gazes up reverently at the magnificent statue of the goddess. Approaching the sacred altar, she kneels silently and clasps her tiny hands together in deep prayer. Closing her eyes, she casually introduces herself to the divine entity and asks if her sudden mother can hear her. Desperate for answers, she begs the deity to reply so she can ask a few pressing questions. Suddenly, a cheerful voice echoes directly in her mind, casually confirming that it can hear her perfectly. Staring up at the stone statue in absolute shock, China listens as the voice warmly notes she seems to be doing well. Glancing around at her oblivious companions, she quickly realizes she is the only one receiving this divine broadcast. The voice confirms she is indeed the goddess Altena, expressing amusement that her reincarnated child actually recognizes her. Utterly stunned, China's mind races as she processes the impossible reality of holding a casual conversation with a deity. Shifting to a surprisingly corporate tone, Altena urges the girl to hurry up because her divine schedule is incredibly busy. Intimidated by the boss-like aura, China nervously asks why the goddess carelessly picked up her soul and reincarnated her. Altena casually dismisses the concern, explaining she simply plucked the soul and dropped her into this world on a whim. When interrogated about the Spirit Princess title, the goddess claims those meddling kids acted completely outside her jurisdiction. Sweating nervously, China realizes Altena views the mighty, legendary spirit lords as mere disobedient children. Pivoting to her overpowered status, China demands an explanation for her mysterious creation magic and the elusive non-attribute. Altena proudly reveals that the non-attribute is her own personal power, making it entirely natural that no mortal understands it. Panic washes over China as she realizes she is the very first mortal ever granted God's exclusive creation attribute. Simplifying the concept, Altena explains that creation allows China to manifest absolutely anything as long as she clearly imagines it. Encouraging her with casual sound effects, The goddess promises the girl will master the absurd power with just a little effort. Dropping another massive bombshell, Altina casually notes that China is actually already using the godly magic subconsciously. Overwhelmed by the cheat-like abilities, China frantically protests that having the power to do anything is far too heavy a burden. Altina strictly forbids her from breaking the world's fundamental laws, explicitly banning her from creating infinite money or destroying reality. Desperate for proper guidance, China begs the goddess to teach her how to properly wield her magic. Citing a jam-packed schedule, Altina flatly rejects the request and orders China to learn through on-the-job training from the adults around her. Wrapping up the conversation exactly like a corporate executive, Altina announces she is shifting to her next project and prepares to leave. China frantically begs the deity to stay, but Altina cheerfully bids her farewell before vanishing completely. Staring blankly at the silent altar, the little girl realizes the divine connection has been entirely severed. Clutching her head in pure frustration, she laments panicking and failing to properly understand the few answers she managed to get. China wonders if the entity she met was truly a goddess, internally realizing the deity was surprisingly careless. Looking completely exhausted, she promises to tell them everything once they return, while Alt asks how it went. Kyle eagerly leans in, demanding to know if she was actually able to talk with God. Sweating under their intense, overwhelming pressure, China stammers nervously. She finally confirms that she did indeed speak with the divine being, causing Kyle to gasp in awe. She explains that she couldn't ask many of the things she wanted to before the conversation abruptly ended. Describing the goddess like a busy, globe-trotting businessman, she admits she barely understood the divine answers anyway. Kyle nods enthusiastically, insisting that simply conversing with God is an incredible feat in itself. Alt cheerfully adds that if they can properly meet the Spirit King as God promised, they can just ask him for the details. Frowning slightly, China silently hopes the Spirit King isn't as sloppy and careless as the goddess was. Clutching her tiny hands together, she excitedly declares her desire to meet the Spirit King soon while internally doubting the goddess's reliability. Kyle enthusiastically announces that her magic training will start tomorrow to prepare for the grand journey. Alt gently warns her not to act on impulse, urging her to think carefully about what she wants to create before casting. He advises her to keep her creations simple at first, as she currently has no idea how much MP her spells will drain. Nodding in understanding, she internally jokes about following dosage instructions, knowing that instantly running out of MP would be disastrous. Recalling God's words about her subconscious magic, she realizes she must have used it for her earlier search and detection spell. A shiver runs down her spine as she realizes how recklessly dangerous it was to use unknown magic without monitoring her MP. Imagining a completely drained, collapsed version of herself, she shudders at how close she came to a magical disaster. She breathes a sigh of relief, deeply grateful that she had her reliable companions by her side during that risky moment. The next morning dawns brightly as Kyle enthusiastically calls out to China to begin her training. Standing tall at the entrance of the Luteal Forest, he proudly declares that today marks her very first step toward becoming an adventurer. Bracing herself with a fierce look, she enthusiastically salutes and calls him master. Kyle blushes, visibly thrilled and flattered by the respectful new title. Pumping his fist, he encourages her to do her best, and officially orders her to call him master during their training sessions. Turning serious, he warns her to remember his crucial lessons, as they are essential for protecting both her life and her companions' lives. Staring up with wide, determined eyes, she shouts a spirited confirmation to her new master. Kyle raises a finger, dramatically announcing the first rule of adventuring is to absolutely know your own strength. He explains that recklessly accepting requests without grasping your limits will endanger everyone and ruin your future career. Moving on, he loudly declares the second rule is to conduct thorough preliminary investigations. As Alt and Rai murmur in impressed agreement, Kyle stresses that knowing your own strength is completely meaningless if you don't understand your enemy. China shouts her understanding, realizing this preparation is especially vital for a beginner like herself. Throwing his arms wide, Kyle reveals the third and final rule is to make your own life the absolute top priority. He sternly explains that when unexpected disasters strike, securing your own safety must always come before helping your companions. A grim skull flashes as he warns that recklessly trying to save others at the cost of your own life will only lead to a total party wipeout. Standing at attention, China flawlessly recites all three of the core adventurer's rules back to her proud master. Kyle praises her incredible spirit with a booming shout, completely hyping up her intense energy. Pointing dramatically toward the forest, he bellows that her practical magic training will now officially begin. He quickly outlines the party's elemental makeup, noting he uses fire, Alt wields water and light, and Rai commands wind. China nods in impressed silence, recognizing that their unique attributes form a perfectly balanced combat party. Leaning in closely, Kyle instructs her to pay strict attention to his upcoming practical demonstration. Raising his hand with explosive energy, he conjures a blazing sphere of flames and screams out the fireball incantation. Spotting their target, Rai swings his arm and unleashes a razor-sharp wind cutter. Kyle enthusiastically cheers on the successful strike with a triumphant fist pump. Stepping up to demonstrate, Kyle summons a blazing sphere of energy and hurls a massive fireball. He casually notes that the impressive explosion is just a basic fire spell. Watching the fiery destruction, China gasps in absolute amazement. Alt proudly states he uses water and light affinities while Rai boasts about his wind magic, leaving China to wonder if they are secretly competing. Kyle explains that visualization is the most critical element of spellcasting, while mana control will naturally improve through rigorous practice. He emphasizes that holding a highly specific mental image makes a spell both stronger and much more stable. Providing an example, he instructs her to picture a fist-sized campfire flame resting perfectly still in the palm of her hand. Demonstrating the technique, Kyle effortlessly conjures a small, controlled fireball hovering right above his palm. China nervously asks if the intense heat burns his skin, but Kyle reassuringly explains that magic never harms its own caster. Extinguishing the flame, he asks if she finally understands the core concept. Realizing that visualization is the absolute key, China eagerly demands a turn to try it herself. As Kyle advises her to practice patiently, she closes her eyes and intensely pictures a fist-sized campfire flame. To everyone's sheer shock, a perfect fireball instantly bursts into existence above her tiny hand. Staring at the floating flame, she stammers in disbelief that simply copying Kyle actually worked. Kyle steps forward in absolute bewilderment and asks if she completely skipped the mandatory incantation. The men realize her creation magic effectively grants her chantless access to every single elemental affinity, marveling at her overpowered abilities. Snapping back to reality, Kyle instructs her to check exactly how much MP that flawless spell just consumed. Checking her status, China stares blankly and reveals the spell somehow only cost a single point of MP. The seasoned adventurers immediately accept the absurdly low cost without question, simply because it came from China. Eager to test her limits, Alt steps forward and asks if she can replicate his magic too. Raising his hand, Alt instantly summons a massive swirling water wall. He explains that water magic requires picturing yourself pulling moisture from a nearby river or well. He notes that drawing water from afar drains massive amounts of MP, but China instantly summons her own perfect barrier before he even finishes speaking. Shocked by her speed in a dry area, Alt checks her MP cost and practically faints when she confirms it only drained 1 point again. Desperate to understand her impossible efficiency, Alt wildly begs her to explain what she did differently. Confused by his panic, China casually points out that water already exists all around them in the air, plants, and soil. Completely failing to grasp modern science, Alt admits he has absolutely no idea what she is talking about. A full hour passes as the group attempts to process the revolutionary magical theory. After finally grasping the concept, a thrilled Alt profusely thanks China for the incredible magical breakthrough. Blinded by Rai's eager stare, China prepares to replicate his signature wind attribute next. Stepping into a wider clearing, Rai unleashes a towering, violent tornado that violently shreds the landscape. After the display, Rai suddenly pinches China's cheek hard and instructs her to check her HP. She internally calls him brutal as Rai explains that a minor injury is the perfect way to track HP loss. Checking her stats, she discovers her HP dropped by 1, but her MP fully recovered without needing any sleep. The men sweat at her absurd cheat abilities, noting that only losing 1 HP from a deliberate attack is completely insane. Kyle playfully pats her head and praises her ridiculous, unyielding toughness. Deciding to test her light affinity, China instantly heals the minor pinch mark on her cheek. Convinced of her overwhelming power, Kyle promises full backup and encourages her to confidently fight the weak local monsters. A quiet moment passes in the serene surroundings. Kyle points toward the brush, warning the group that a monster known as a rapid is lurking just up ahead. Reassuring a tense China, he instructs her to stay calm because they can easily take down a single target. Announcing that it is time for Rai's magic debut, Alt encourages China to watch the upcoming strike closely. Stepping into a combat stance, Rai violently swings his arm and unleashes a fierce wind cutter. China stares in absolute bewilderment as the supposedly deadly spell merely slices a single piece of fruit from a branch. Overjoyed by his flawless precision, she excitedly praises Rai's amazing magical control. Eager to test her own limits, China steps forward with a fierce shout and attempts to cast the same spell. Her magic manifests as a blunt wind shot rather than a sharp blade, prompting Kyle to note her mental image wasn't clear enough. Instructed to visualize the attack more specifically, she focuses intensely and casts the spell again with renewed determination. Kyle praises the drastically improved strike, urging her to hold on to that exact feeling of magical control. 10 days later, China demonstrates her massive growth by flawlessly conjuring a blazing fireball. Without skipping a beat, she summons a sturdy water wall before instantly firing off a razor-sharp wind cutter. Panting slightly from the magical barrage, she proudly turns to her mentors and demands an evaluation of her skills. Alt and Rai shower her with enthusiastic praise, genuinely impressed by her incredible combat progress. Kyle confirms her readiness for the forest, prompting China to excitedly ask if they are finally heading out tomorrow. Suddenly, Grandpa Dan screams in absolute refusal, completely horrified by the prospect of her imminent departure. Clinging desperately to the group, the distraught guildmaster whines about them leaving so soon, while Alt promises they will return. Grabbing Kyle's shoulder, Dan fiercely demands that he protect China at all costs and never let her suffer a single scratch. Trembling with overwhelming anxiety, Dan lists his endless worries about the monster-filled forest and the high potential for disaster. Sighing at the overprotective rant, Kyle acknowledges Dan's intense concerns about this being China's very first real expedition. Brushing off the old man's endless fretting, Kyle announces their early start for tomorrow and signals the end of the conversation. Dan tearfully waves them off with desperate warnings to be careful, which China warmly acknowledges with a bright smile. Walking back to the inn, the group chuckles over how Danglif acted exactly like a doting, overprotective grandfather. Rai casually notes that Dan's extreme worry is completely understandable given the heavy circumstances of their mission. He points out that China's striking, conspicuous appearance will inevitably make her a massive target in the dangerous wilderness. Suddenly remembering a crucial detail, Alt reminds China to check her body later for the hidden mark of the Spirit King. China panics and immediately checks her back, screaming in absolute horror as a glowing magical crest materializes on her skin. Staring at the blinding neon light radiating from her own back, she frantically questions the absurd and flashy phenomenon. Alt rushes into her room in a blind panic to check on her, but a deeply embarrassed China quickly dismisses his concern. The men casually accept the bizarre glowing mark as just another one of China's quirks, noting it is better placed where she cannot easily see it. Kyle orders her to get to bed early and rest up, warning that she needs her full strength to survive the unfamiliar forest environment. Snuggling deep into her warm blankets, China mentally prepares herself for the real adventure beginning the next morning. The massive, imposing entrance of the Looter Forest looms ominously before the party as they finally arrive at the tree line. Standing at the threshold, China tries to focus on their mission to find the Spirit King, but gets immediately distracted by daydreams of fluffy beasts. Snapping her out of her fluffy fantasy, Alt gently checks on her well-being and asks if she is ready to move forward. Slapping her cheeks to regain her focus, she grips her staff tightly and cautiously ventures into the dark woods. Standing victoriously over a defeated monster, China breathes heavily as Kyle praises her perfect first solo kill. Riding the thrilling momentum of her success, the party maintains a steady, confident pace through the dense wilderness. Without a single moment of hesitation, they press deeper and deeper into the dangerous, unknown depths of the magical forest. Cheering in excitement, Kyle and Rai praise China for successfully taking down a Garfus. The seasoned adventurers enthusiastically celebrate her victory, calling her absolutely amazing. Blushing at the praise, China realizes she is finally getting used to magic while still relying heavily on her companion's protective watch. Clenching her fists with determination, she vows to keep gaining experience so she will never hold her team back. The celebratory mood instantly vanishes as Rai detects an aggressive Granwolves, warning the group to stay on high alert. Stepping forward confidently, China freezes in sheer terror the moment she beholds the monster's massive, imposing size. The massive beast lets out a deafening roar and lunges forward with terrifying speed. Frozen in place by absolute panic, China can only gasp as Kyle desperately screams her name. Reacting instantly, Kyle and Rai dive in front of the paralyzed girl to fiercely intercept the deadly strike. Collapsing to the ground in tears, China frantically apologizes for completely freezing up in fear. Kneeling beside her, Kyle solemnly acknowledges that facing a real monster is truly a terrifying ordeal. He gently explains that the absolute terror of a life-threatening situation requires maintaining a perfectly cool head. Staring deeply into her eyes, he grimly asks what would have happened if they had not been there to block the attack. He firmly reminds her that real combat is entirely different from practice, stressing the vital importance of knowing her own limits. Staring at her trembling hands, China bitterly realizes that her recent successes had made her dangerously overconfident. She mentally berates herself, admitting she knew absolutely nothing about the paralyzing reality of genuine combat. Stepping closer, Alt admits the men are also at fault for letting their guard down simply because of her special abilities. Overwhelmed by their kindness and her own failure, China bows her head and tearfully apologizes once more. Alt warmly encourages her to rely on them heavily, advising her to grow stronger at her own steady pace without rushing. Wiping her tears, she desperately wishes to grow stronger while secretly fearing the pain of hurting herself and others. Looking at the destruction around her, she realizes she must take absolute responsibility for her overwhelming magical power. Alt gently checks on her well-being, prompting a quiet, determined nod from the recovering girl. Walking slowly, China stares sadly at the heavily scarred forest and the monster she brutally struck down with her uncontrolled magic. Surveying the massive crater, she grimly reflects that there was absolutely no reason to unleash such devastating, excessive force. Kneeling beside the fallen beast, she softly whispers a heartfelt apology for her reckless destruction. Placing a tiny hand on the creature, she genuinely prays that its spirit can finally find true peace. Closing her eyes, she repeats her sorrowful apology to the silent, wounded forest. Clenching her fists over her chest, she fiercely vows to train harder and completely master her overwhelming power. Suddenly, a strange presence interrupts her mourning, causing her to gasp and turn around in shock. Staring in absolute disbelief at a glowing manifestation, she stammers in sheer confusion. A mysterious voice echoes through the clearing, claiming it finally found her, as she nervously demands its identity. Materializing before her eyes, the ethereal being casually introduces itself as a legendary divine beast. Utterly stunned by the impossible encounter, China stares wide-eyed at the mythical creature standing directly before her. Staring in absolute awe, China breathlessly murmurs the name of the legendary divine beast standing before her. A majestic nine-tailed fox materializes, looking exactly like the mythical creature depicted in Grandpa Dan's picture book. Revealing itself as the messenger of the Earth Spirit Lord, the elegant fox formally invites China to meet its master. Despite the overwhelming divine presence, China's mind instantly latches onto a completely different priority. Completely ignoring the gravity of the situation, she stares intensely at the magnificent, utterly perfect fluff of the fox's tails. Sensing her unspoken desire, the divine beast gently offers her a ride, leaving China stuttering in sheer disbelief. The fox cheerfully grants her permission to touch its fur as much as she likes, prompting her to eagerly dive into the soft fluff. Sweating profusely, her companions frantically warn her not to act rude and accidentally anger the divine creature. Glancing back at the terrified adventurers, the fox calmly assures them there is absolutely no need to be so wary. The beast humbly explains that it is merely a creature inheriting the first generation's memories, inviting everyone to simply relax. Flanked by several smaller foxkin, the majestic creature signals for the group to finally follow it to its master. Riding comfortably on its back, China curiously asks if it is the exact same divine beast that once accompanied the original spirit princess. The fox chuckles and shakes its head, gently reminding her that even divine beasts are not truly immortal. It reveals it is actually the 32nd generation, explaining that they pass down their sacred roles roughly every century. During each transition, the successor flawlessly inherits all the accumulated memories of the very first generation. This sacred cycle ensures they will never forget the spirit princess they loved or the ancient origins of their world. Stopping before a lush, mystical grove, the fox smoothly announces their arrival at their final destination. Bowing its head respectfully, the beast formally presents China to its waiting master. A stunning, regal woman emerges from the glowing light, warmly welcoming China by name. Flashing a deeply affectionate smile, the majestic figure expresses her genuine relief at seeing the girl safe and well. China stares in absolute awe, instantly realizing she is standing face to face with the legendary Earth Spirit Lord herself. Stepping forward with gentle grace, the Spirit Lord softly calls China their truly beloved child. Wrapping her arms around the tiny girl, the deity joyfully embraces her and marvels at her adorable form. Utterly overwhelmed by the divine affection, China nervously stammers out a greeting. China politely apologizes for the sudden intrusion and prepares her urgent questions, but the Spirit Lord admits she already anticipated her arrival. Pausing the conversation, the deity gently suggests that China should first clear the air with her mortal companions. The Earth Spirit Lord specifically hints at the massive secret regarding China's life before she ever entered the Lunar Forest. China tenses up, grimly reflecting on her hidden past as a talentless, overworked corporate slave in her late 20s. Sensing her deep hesitation, Alt steps forward and warmly promises they will completely accept whatever truth she has to share. The Spirit Lord gently pushes her forward, confirming that these seasoned adventurers are genuinely worthy of her absolute trust. Looking back at her loyal friends, China gathers her courage and decides she truly wants them to know her secret. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she finally begins to confess the unbelievable truth about her real identity. The companions listen in stunned silence as she pours out the entire story of her past life and reincarnation. She tearfully asks if they hate her for acting like a spoiled child, but they instantly shoot down her ridiculous fear. Alt firmly assures her that both the hardworking adult and the cute child are exactly the same person they care about. Kyle fiercely agrees, urging her to stop worrying and continue relying on them exactly as she always has. Overcome with immense relief and gratitude, China bursts into happy tears as the Spirit Lord watches the heartwarming scene. With the heavy emotional baggage finally cleared, the Earth Spirit Lord announces that all necessary preparations are complete. Raising a glowing hand, the deity officially begins to recount the true ancient history of how their world was formed. The deity reveals that after leaving the world of the living, China's soul accidentally got lost before it could ever reach the underworld. The Earth Spirit Lord explained that unlike normal stagnant souls requiring purification, China's soul shined with a breathtaking beauty. Drifting through the vast space between worlds, her radiant spirit accidentally caught the wandering eye of Lady Altena. Enchanted by its beauty, the goddess desperately wanted to watch the soul grow despite the strict cosmic rule forbidding direct divine interference on the surface. Bending the rules, Lady Altena bestowed a sturdy body and null attribute magic upon China before entrusting her to the Spirit Lords. Instantly enamored with the girl, the Spirit Lords eagerly granted her countless blessings to shape her into the new Spirit Princess. Refusing to let the future Spirit Princess be born as a mere human, they attempted to transport her directly to the Earth Spirit Lord but encountered an unexpected dimensional anomaly. The sudden disturbance violently threw China off course, causing her to plummet from the heavens and land near a remote forest river. Kyle and the others gasped in realization, finally understanding exactly how she ended up abandoned by that riverbank. Admitting her absolute ignorance regarding surface affairs, the Spirit Lord warmly thanked the adventurers for protecting China in her stead. Smiling fondly at the tiny girl, Kyle proudly declared that they were incredibly grateful to have met her too. Alt bowed respectfully, thanking the divine beings for entrusting them with a child who completely transformed their once dull lives. Overwhelmed by their heartfelt confessions, China burst into tears of pure relief as she realized she was never just a burden to them. The Spirit Lord nodded sagely, completely agreeing with the men that China was simply far too adorable for anyone to resist. Clearing his throat nervously, Alt bravely interrupted the touching moment to address the glaring issue of China's dangerously cute appearance. He urgently begged the Spirit Lord to find some magical way to make the girl's striking features stand out a little less. Recoiling in sheer horror, the Spirit Lord frantically demanded to know why anyone would ever want to hide such radiantly lovely features. Gripping her head in absolute disbelief, the deity wildly accused the adventurers of wanting to intentionally make the girl ugly. Alt hastily clarified that while they could fend off common thugs, her extreme cuteness could easily attract dangerous, untouchable royalty seeking to exploit her. Frowning deeply at the grim reality of human malice, the Spirit Lord solemnly agreed that ensuring China's safety was their top priority. She sheepishly apologized for the flashy design, confessing that her vibrant hair and eye colors were actually decided by a chaotic committee of all the Spirit Lords. To the party's utter bewilderment, she revealed that the divine beings settled their design disputes by playing a high-stakes game of rock, paper, scissors. Since the winners eagerly claimed the most prominent features to show off their respective elements, China ended up looking like a dazzling, multicolored beacon. The deity proudly declared that their competitive coloring contest successfully created a precious, unbelievably cute treasure. Acknowledging their practical worldly concerns, she firmly agreed that they must actively prevent any harm from befalling their beloved child. She sadly explained that they could not simply erase the vibrant colors because they served as absolute proof of the Spirit Lord's divine protection. Raising her hand, she compromised by offering to weave a powerful perception inhibition spell over the young girl. She explained that this unique illusion magic would guarantee that only those explicitly permitted by China or the gods could ever perceive her true form. A soft magical glow enveloped China's body, instantly shifting her flashy aura into a much more mundane, ordinary appearance. As Kyle sighed in massive relief, the Spirit Lord strictly warned them to remain vigilant because her underlying facial features remained dangerously adorable. Slipping into the role of an overprotective mother, the deity frantically ordered China to ignore strangers with sweets and pretend not to know directions. Sweating under the barrage of parental advice, China quickly changed the subject by politely asking to learn more about the world's magic system. She specifically asked the deity to define the mysterious god race and explain exactly how it differed from regular humanity. The Spirit Lord smiled warmly and explained that the only real difference was that the god race possessed an infinitely long lifespan. She clarified that while the original Spirit Princess belonged to the Spirit race, anyone directly forged by a true god was classified as the god race. Pointing a delicate finger at the girl, she noted that China's unique creation involved both the Spirit Lords and Lady Altena working together. Therefore, she concluded, China was essentially an impossibly rare hybrid existing as a half-spirit, half-god being. The hardened adventurers broke into a cold sweat, completely stunned as yet another absurd cheat attribute was casually added to her resume. Oblivious to their shock, the cheerful deity enthusiastically offered to teach the little girl how to craft stilts or water guns. Flailing her tiny arms, China frantically redirected the conversation back to the highly critical topic of advanced magic. Nodding in approval, the Spirit Lord prepared to thoroughly explain the overwhelming mysteries behind her creation and space-time storage magic. The Earth Spirit Lord excitedly explains that creation magic is a boundless power capable of literally anything. She clarifies that China can easily replicate existing spells or forge entirely new ones simply by imagining them taking shape. Amazed by the endless possibilities, China realizes she could instantly manifest everyday items like clothes, shoes, and delicious meals. Her excitement quickly shifts to generating infinite money, but the deity strictly forbids the dangerous idea. The Spirit Lord raises an eyebrow, questioning if the young girl understands the disastrous economic concept of inflation. Recognizing her adult knowledge, the deity nods as China correctly notes that forging endless currency would devalue the market and plunge the entire world into absolute chaos. The men proudly shower her with praise for her cleverness, completely oblivious that she simply remembers basic middle school economics. Realizing the gravity of the situation, China finally understands exactly why Lady Altena strictly banned her from creating money. Transitioning smoothly to her next ability, the Spirit Lord prepares to explain the intricate mechanics of space-time storage. The deity assures a worried China that the flawless storage magic carries zero risk of permanently losing her stored items. China internally laments not having this perfect organization tool in her past life as the deity explains how items naturally present themselves exactly when needed. As the sun slowly sets over the lush forest, the Spirit Lord gently asks if the girl has any remaining questions. Later that evening, the divine beings happily stuff their faces and praise the incredible, unmatched taste of human cuisine. Alt modestly accepts the high praise, humbly noting he couldn't prepare anything truly grand over a simple campfire. Smiling brightly, China confidently declares that Alt is undeniably the absolute best chef in the entire world. The pleasant night flies by as the men affectionately agree that every single meal tastes infinitely better when shared with their beloved China. With morning arriving, the devastated Earth Spirit Lord sighs heavily and reluctantly prepares to leave the adorable girl behind. Turning her divine attention to Rai, she suddenly calls the startled adventurer forward for a special blessing. Bestowing him with her sacred earth element protection, she firmly commands him to use the immense power to keep China completely safe. With the divine blessing secured, the majestic fox steps forward to address its powerful master. The divine beast confidently announces its bold decision to personally accompany China's party from this day forward. Surprised by the sudden addition, Alt nervously asks if the beast isn't supposed to be actively guarding their sacred territory. The fox casually dismisses his worry, explaining that a new leader will naturally rise, and the forest's magical barrier will hold perfectly without it. Tilting its massive head, the beast demands confirmation from the Spirit Lord that its sudden departure is fully acceptable. The Spirit Lord agrees, but hesitantly points out that a giant, mythical fox will undeniably attract massive amounts of unwanted attention in human towns. Unfazed by the practical concern, the beast disappears in a blinding flash of transformative magic. China screams in pure, unbridled delight as the massive beast shrinks down into an impossibly fluffy, adorable tiny fox. The miniature fox smugly asks for permission to join, clearly knowing it has completely won over China's heart. Noticing Alt's lingering hesitation, the fox prompts him to share whatever practical concerns are still bothering him. Alt explains that a 5-year-old possessing a familiar would attract dangerous suspicion, shutting down the fox's plan to contract directly with China. Flattening its tiny ears, the disappointed beast reluctantly accepts the grim reality of human politics and rules. Pivoting instantly, the fox points a paw at a completely bewildered Rai and demands to form the familiar contract with him instead. Eager to finalize the magic, the tiny fox urgently requests a proper name for the binding contract. Caught completely off guard, the group stammers as they desperately try to brainstorm a fitting title for a divine creature. Staring at its round, bright yellow body, China's mind instantly connects the fluffy creature to a sweet citrus mikan. The fox eagerly latches onto the name mikan, absolutely thrilling at the cute and bright-sounding moniker. A shocked Rai frantically asks if it truly wants such a simple name, just as Mikan decisively initiates the binding ritual. The magical contract seals flawlessly, and Rai formally welcomes his new divine partner to their growing team. Mikan glares sharply at Rai, fiercely reminding him that despite their contract, protecting China remains its absolute highest priority. The tiny fox then orders the entire party to drop all formal language and simply treat it as an equal from now on. With their newest fluffy companion secured, Kyle cheerfully signals the start of a brand new, exciting chapter in their grand adventure.